Before you start to sew, we need to consider the thread. This is embroidery floss and it usually comes in these skeins, which are usually 8 meters. Once you start to pull the thread off them, they can get in a tangle. So it's a good idea, if you have much embroidery floss, to store it in a box like this, and you just wind the thread or the floss onto these cardboard bobbins. You can see that there's splits on the sides to put the ends of your thread through, and you can write on the end the code number for the thread so that when you run out and need some more of the same colour, it's easy to buy some more. So I'm just going to use this thread today, and I'm going to pull off a piece that's double the length I want, because I like to fold my thread over. So after cutting off the thread to start with, I would usually wind the rest of the skein of embroidery floss or thread onto one of those little cardboard bobbins to keep it neat. Now you can see that it's actually not one strand of thread, but there are 6. So we're only going to use 2. It would be very rare to use 6. Sometimes you might use 1 or 3, but I like to use a thickness of 4 strands most of the time. So I will start by pulling off 2. And you don't want to just pull it down like I did then, because that ends up in a tangle and it's very hard to untangle. So pull it apart gently, and then as soon as it starts to get too twisted, stop and run your nails down the thread, and then pull apart a little bit more and stop and run your nails down the thread a little bit more, and go quite slowly with this. It's really not worth rushing the process of pulling the thread apart, because as soon as you get a tangle, you won't be able to rescue it and your thread is just wasted. Okay, so the thinner piece here, the 2 strands, that's what I'm going to sew with. I'll just straighten that out. And the other leftover piece, which is 4 strands thick, I'll save that to use in a moment. And I would usually just wind that onto the outside of the cardboard bobbin, which has the thread of the same colour. For embroidery, I'll fold this thread in half. If I were just sewing on a button or sewing a hem or something like that, I would take one of the ends and thread it through my needle. And then I'd pull it through a short way for a single thickness of thread, or all the way to the end and knot the 2 ends together. But for embroidery, I'll use the thread folded in half, and I'll put the 2 ends, which are 4 strands of floss, together, and I'll have the fold down the end. Now I'm going to swap now to red thread, because it will be easier to see when I demonstrate the stitches. So I've got the 2 ends together here, which I'm going to thread through the needle. So that's 4 strands thick, and the fold is at the bottom. I'm going to demonstrate by sewing on some calico, because it will be easy to see. You can embroider on calico or on linen or many other fabrics. And here you can see I've got it set up in an embroidery hoop, just to hold the fabric firmly. The hoop has 2 rings, and you take it apart and put the fabric on one ring and then press down the outer ring, and then you can tighten it. If you've got a large piece of embroidery to work and a smaller hoop, you can move the fabric around so that the part that you're working on is in the center of the hoop. Another good fabric for embroidery is felt. So I've got the fold down the bottom, and I start from the back, put the needle through the fabric coming from the back to the front, and notice that there's no knot, so there's nothing to stop the thread from coming right through. But I don't pull it all the way. I go back into the fabric and then take the needle and put it through the loop at the end. This stops it coming through, and it's used instead of a knot, and it helps to keep your work very neat at the back. Sometimes there'll be a reason that you want to start with a knot instead, but a lot of the time for embroidery and hand stitching and cross stitch, this is a neat way to start. Now I'm just doing running stitch here. If I were doing this as part of a design, I might do smaller stitches, or I might draw a line to follow, but I'm really just demonstrating to you how to start off today, so I'm just doing a few stitches here. So running stitch has a gap in between each stitch. And you can see here on this decoration I've used running stitch to fill in the red area.